So I know I don't look like it, but I was born in 1988. In 1997, when I was 9, my family got a new computer, and for the first time, we had home internet use. Today, the internet is so easily accessible, we barely even think about it. In this room alone, my phone, my PlayStation, 3 separate laptops, my Kindle, and even my printer all have internet capability to some degree. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the internet was a relatively new thing, and kids my age ate it up. To us, the internet was a whole new world full of exciting opportunities right at our fingertips. The internet has done a lot of great things. You wouldn't even be able to watch this video without it. But there's also a dark side to it. This is the story of Kacie Woody, who was born just a year after me and did a lot of the same things online in the early 2000s as I did. But unfortunately, her story turned out much different. Kacie Renee Woody was born on October 17, 1989 in Little Rock, Arkansas, the third child of Christy and Rick Woody. She was also welcomed by 2 older brothers, Austin and Tim. Shortly after her birth, Kacie was diagnosed with meconium aspiration syndrome, a lung condition that affects newborns. She spent several weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit, or the NICU, and actually came close to death, but managed to pull through. Kacie grew up in Holland, Arkansas, a small community of less than 600 people, about 50 miles north of Little Rock. In 1997, when Kacie was just 7, the entire Woody family was in their car when 2 horses ran in front of the road, causing a wreck. Kacie's mother, Christy, was killed in the accident. Kacie rarely talked about this with anyone and developed a hatred of horses afterward. Ironically, though, Christy had loved horses, and Kacie inherited her collection of horse figurines, which she kept in her room for the rest of her life. As she got older, Kacie seemed to flourish. By 2002, she was a 7th grader at Greenbrier Middle School, where she sang in the choir and played saxophone. She loved singing and poetry, and was said to be quiet around people she didn't know, but bubbly and lively around her friends. Kacie had been in the Greenbrier school system since kindergarten. Her brother Austin had played football, and both of her older brothers had been basketball stars, so she was pretty well known among her peers. Due to her mother's early death, she was also said to be constantly looking for a mother figure. At one point, she also spent an entire day looking for someone who would let her get her ears pierced without parental permission. She was also more responsible than a lot of girls her age. She cooked her own meals, did her own laundry, and didn't have to be told to do her homework. Kacie's father, Rick, worked as a police officer and often had long night shifts that would take him away from her for long periods of time. At this point, I believe Austin had already moved out of the house. But Rick relied on Kacie's brother Tim, who was in college and still lived at home, as well as her Aunt Teresa, who lived next door, and her grandmother, to help with his already precocious daughter. But Kacie grew up in an interesting time. Like I said earlier, the late 90s and early 2000s saw a huge spike in home internet use. To a 13-year-old, especially one living in a very small town where not a lot of things probably happened, the internet was probably very appealing. And Kacie definitely utilized it. On New Year's Eve 2001, Kacie met a boy named Dave in a Christian chat room. I'm not sure if the Woody family or Kacie's friends were religious, but Kacie and her friends picked this chat room because they thought it would be safer, though there wasn't a whole lot going on in the chats that related to Christianity. Dave told Kacie that he was 17 and lived in San Diego. To teenage girls who lived in what they probably perceived as the middle of nowhere, a California boy seemed extra cool. Kacie and Dave seemed to hit it off pretty quickly, bonding over their shared love of Elvis as well as music in general. They soon exchanged photos as well as phone numbers. Kacie quickly warmed up to Dave and soon told him about her mother's death. This is something that she didn't like to talk about a lot, not even to her closest friends, so opening up to Dave about this was probably huge for her. And after this, he told her his own similar story. His aunt had been in a car wreck not too long ago and was in a coma. The prognosis was grim. The fact that they both had loved ones who had been in serious car wrecks brought them even closer. There's conflicting, or at least different, information about how Kacie's friends felt about Dave. One source said that they talked to him frequently on Yahoo Messenger themselves and considered him a friend. Others said that they were skeptical. Kacie's friend Samantha said she wasn't sure Dave was actually a teenager because he used words like groovy and wicked, things teenagers in 2002 wouldn't say, at least not in casual conversation. At first, Rick wasn't too concerned about his daughter's new online friend. As long as she was in her own home, he felt that she was safe. But at some point in her friendship with Dave, he turned 18. When Rick found out about this, he forbid Kacie from communicating with Dave anymore, but she didn't listen. Kacie and Dave's relationship did briefly cross that threshold from friends to more than friends, but in May 2002, she met a boy named Scott online. Scott said he was 14 and lived in Alpharetta, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta. One source said Kacie and Scott officially began dating on October 3rd of that year, but Kacie's friend Samantha said in a documentary that they started dating a week after they met online. I'm not sure what caused the discrepancy here, but what is clear is that Kacie broke up with Dave to be with Scott. She and Dave still maintained a friendship. Dave's aunt, who was still in a coma from her car wreck, lived in Arkansas. Kacie and her friends often talked about the possibility of Kacie and Dave meeting up if he was ever in Arkansas to visit his aunt. But Kacie always maintained that she didn't have any plans to meet him in person. Kacie's friends were clearly worried about her online habits. She had only known Scott for a couple of weeks before she gave him her home address, and she had been talking to Dave on the phone for quite some time. On the morning of Tuesday, December 3rd, 2002, Samantha talked to their school counselor, expressing concerns over Kacie's online relationships. The counselor brought Kacie in and attempted to warn her of the dangers of giving out too much information online, but Kacie didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of it. She was angry at Samantha, but they did end up patching things up by the end of the day. After school, Kacie asked Samantha if she could spend the night at her house, but Samantha said no because she knew her mother wouldn't say yes to a sleepover on a school night. Kacie asked several of her other girlfriends the same question, but got similar responses, I assume with similar reasoning. The night of December 3rd was 39 degrees Fahrenheit and raining. Kacie's brother Tim was either at his school library or a night class, depending on which source you read. Eric Betts, a friend of Tim's who was staying with the family at the time, was also at a night class. Rick Woody was at work. I believe he left around 6 p.m. and his shift wasn't scheduled to end until 2 a.m. He'd thought about calling in sick due to a sinus infection, but went in anyway. Kacie's Aunt Teresa, who lived next door, was at her son's basketball game. Kacie was basically alone, and as she usually did at night, left all the doors unlocked and the lights on. That night, like many other nights, Kacie was talking to her friend Dave. Dave was especially upset that night. He said he was actually in Arkansas and had been driving there from California for the past 4 days. His aunt's prognosis was more grim than ever, and she wasn't expected to live for much longer, so he wanted to pay her one final visit. Either during or after her conversation with Dave, Kacie was chatting online with her boyfriend, Scott. Scott received his last message from Kacie around 9:41 p.m. After that, she suddenly stopped responding. Scott continued to message Kacie but got no response. He called the Woody house around 10:15 p.m. but there was no answer. He continued to message Kacie but still got nothing. Around 10:45 p.m., he sent an email to her friend Jessica, but Jessica wouldn't see it until the next morning. Eric Betts got home around 10:17 and assumed Kacie was in bed. He stayed up for a while doing laundry, but around 11:30, he realized she wasn't in her room. When Tim got home a few minutes later, Eric asked him where Kacie was, but he didn't know either. They called Rick, who had also assumed she was at home. They called her Aunt Teresa and some of her friends, but none of them knew anything either. So Rick called the sheriff's office. Investigators knew pretty quickly that Kacie had probably met with foul play. There were signs of forced entry and a struggle. Her 2 jackets and her shoes were still where she'd left them earlier that day. Nothing else was missing from the house except Kacie's pajamas, which she'd presumably been wearing when she left. Even her broken eyeglasses were found in the home. On a cold, rainy night, Kacie leaving the house willingly without her jackets, shoes, or glasses was very unlikely. Fortunately, there were clues. Kacie's computer was still pulled up to her chats with Scott. She had also been talking to Scott about Dave, saying that she had been talking to Dave on the phone. Samantha and Jessica found out about Kacie's abduction the next morning. At first, they thought Scott might be behind it. Investigators were able to get in touch with Scott, who turned out to be exactly who he said he was, a 14-year-old boy from the suburbs of Atlanta. Eric was also able to get in touch with Scott, though I'm not sure when. And Scott also confirmed that Kacie had simply stopped responding to his chats the night before, and he didn't know where she went either. The search continued, with police going door to door in the neighborhood asking for information from the neighbors, as well as volunteers searching the wooded area around the Woody home. Then someone, I'm not sure if it was Kacie's friends or investigators, thought back to her online friend Dave. Dave had told Kacie that his name was David Fagan, but an online search led to some very interesting things. Dave's real name was David Fuller. He was 47 and lived in La Mesa, California, a suburb of San Diego. He was married and had 2 children, though his wife had filed for divorce in July of that year. He had also recently been fired from his job as a used car salesman after being caught with child porn on his work computer. At some point, he'd been arrested for domestic violence, but the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. He'd also been accused of inappropriate behavior with his 7-year-old daughter and investigated by Child Protective Services, but this investigation also led to nothing. Police were able to trace Fuller via his internet history and were able to obtain his credit card records. On December 4th, the day after the abduction, his credit card had been charged for a storage unit he'd bought a month earlier. That storage unit was in Conway, Arkansas, just down the road from Holland. Investigators looked into hotels in the area for any suspicious travelers and found a David Fuller registered at a nearby Motel 6. He'd arrived on December 2nd and was scheduled to stay for a week. The hotel manager remembered David clearly because he'd gotten angry when he found out he couldn't connect to the internet from his room and had stormed off to a local library. I'm not sure if he couldn't get online because there were problems with the internet, or if internet capability in the hotel just wasn't possible at the time. After all, this was 2002. Investigators wondered if David was holding Kacie in the storage unit and quickly went there, hoping they'd find her alive. On the way, they heard a report that the car David had rented had been spotted in Little Rock, and they grew hopeful, believing he was still in the area. They thought he'd gotten scared because of the publicity surrounding the abduction and had fled, leaving Kacie alive in the unit. Police got to the storage unit between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., again, depending on what source you read. The door to David's unit was closed but unlocked, so they opened it. As the door opened, they saw a silver minivan with the engine still running, and they heard a gunshot. A SWAT team surrounded the unit, trying to coax someone out, but getting no response. Around 8:30 p.m., they entered the unit, where they found the body of David Fuller, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, presumably just as they had opened the door. Inside the van, they also found the body of Kacie Woody. Kacie had also died from a single gunshot wound to the head. She had been taken from her house the previous night, presumably by David, who covered her mouth with a chloroform-soaked rag, knocking her unconscious. David had been in the unit since around 10:15 p.m. on December 3rd. He left the unit once around 7:24 a.m. on December 4th to go to a convenience store. Police believe he was planning to escape the storage unit once it got dark on the night of the 4th. The medical examiner was unable to determine Kacie's time of death, since she could have been unconscious for quite a while, maybe even the entire time she was in the unit. But at some point between her abduction and David's suicide, she was raped and murdered. About a week before Kacie's murder, David Fuller's neighbors back in La Mesa noticed that he left abruptly. He didn't tell anyone that he was leaving or where he was going, though he was presumably traveling to kill Kacie. Once he got to Arkansas, he continued to talk to Kacie on the phone, still posing as 18-year-old Dave. He had also made a weekend trip to Arkansas back in October, and police believe he made that trip to spy on Kacie and her family. There's one incident described in a documentary where Samantha and Jessica were having a sleepover at Kacie's house and they were alone. They heard the floorboards creaking as if someone else was there. Nobody was ever found in the house, and the incident seemed to pass with no negative consequences other than fear. I couldn't find exactly when this incident took place, but if it was in October, I wonder if it was David Fuller in the house. After Kacie's murder, police looked into David Fuller to see if he could be connected to any other crimes. He had lured in other girls online in a similar manner to the way he lured in Kacie, but none of these had ended in violence. Rick Woody, along with Samantha and Jessica, later set up the Kacie Woody Foundation to raise awareness about the dangers of online predators. I will leave a link to that below if you're interested. So now I want to talk about a related subject that I didn't originally intend to talk about, but something that kept coming up in my research. It's something that you might already be aware of, but I just wanted to address it because it felt weird to leave it out. One of the sources I used for this video was a 4-part article series in an Arkansas newspaper called the Democrat-Gazette. The first part of Caught in the Web was published in 2003 and written by a journalist named Kacie Fry. With Caught in the Web, Fry aimed to make more parents aware of the problem of online predators using Kacie's story. Fry earned numerous awards for this series, and at one point movie rights were being discussed. I'm not sure if they were for information from the article or for Kacie's story in general. In August 2019, so not too long ago, Kacie Fry commented on a Facebook post made in May by Ashley Flowers, the host of the Crime Junkies podcast. Fry's post accused Flowers of reading sections of her article verbatim without citing it as a source or giving credit. She accused Flowers and her co-host, Britt Prowett, of doing this in several episodes of their podcast. She also accused them of disrespecting crime victims and their loved ones by exploiting their stories for entertainment and money. Fry threatened legal action if the podcasts weren't taken down. This story caught on pretty quickly, and at least 2 more accusations of plagiarism followed in the next few days. Flowers and her team deleted several episodes of the podcast. The Democrat-Gazette also sent a cease and desist letter to the podcast later that month. They had until September 12th to respond, a date that has now come and gone. I don't know many details about their actual response, but Kacie Fry did post on that Facebook post later on and say that they hadn't complied with the order. As of November 2019, when I'm filming this, at least the episode about Kacie Woody is back up on their website, along with a list of sources cited. This story made pretty big news, especially in the true crime community. Here on YouTube, I know there was talk about not only plagiarism, but about sensitivity when covering these cases. Ever since I started making true crime videos on this channel, I've always been very careful to cite my sources. Some of my older videos don't have sources on them anymore because I would link them in blog entries, and the blog entries are no longer there due to a dispute with my web server, but that's a different story. I've also been very careful to be as respectful as possible when discussing these cases. The last thing I would want is for the loved one of a crime victim to come across one of my videos and feel like I was being disrespectful, though I do understand that is subjective to a degree. And with all of my videos, but especially this one, I'm always very careful to word things in my own way, or if I'm going to read out a quote, to give the source or at least the person who said it. As for the plagiarism allegations, I really can't comment on them. I've never listened to the Crime Junkies podcast. I don't really want that to be the focus of this video anyway, but I did feel the need to address it because I saw so many articles on it. In fact, I think I'm pretty sure I saw more articles on this than I did about Kacie's actual case, which I did not expect. So in addition to the plagiarism debate, this case also obviously brings up a lot about internet safety. Now in the year 2019, it doesn't seem like this is something that we think about as much as we probably should. If you pay any attention to my internet history, you already know my full name as well as the general area of the world that I live in. And how often do we store passwords on our phones and stay logged into our various apps and websites while never giving the possibility of hacking a second thought? But with that being said, I think a lot of kids today are much more aware of the dangers of things like meeting people online. Just to clarify, meeting people online isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've done it before, but it's just something you need to be cautious with. If you're a teenager in 2019, you've grown up with the internet and are more accustomed to it. A lot of people my age are having kids now. And since we were really the first generation to experience the internet widespread, we also know more about how to handle it than our parents did. So maybe kids growing up now and kids who will be born later will have a better grasp on this sort of thing, and things like what happened to Kacie will decrease. So that's just about all I have for you today on Kacie Woody. If you're new here, I don't usually talk about myself this much in my true crime videos, but Kacie was just a year younger than me, and we had a lot in common, so I feel like I connected with this story a little bit more than I might have for some others. But as always, I would love to know your thoughts. What do you think of this story? And how do you think parents and other caregivers can strike a balance between keeping kids safe online and not invading their privacy? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.